I'm here with Rhonda Gruenewald, and we just had you on Life on the Rock, and you were the president founder of Vocation Ministry. Tell us a little bit about that.
So Vocation Ministry was born out of the need in the church that there wasn't anything out there to tell priests, parishioners, educators how to promote vocations in their environment, wherever they are, whether it's a parish or a classroom or a school setting. And so that's how it came to be, is that when I was asked to resurrect a parish vocation committee at my own parish, first of all, A, I'm a convert. I didn't know what that meant. B, I went home and asked Google what that was, and Google didn't have anything for me. So since that was all, I didn't know anything.
And you know why did the priest ask you?
It's a really good question. He said he didn't even know me very well. I had ridden on a bus with him to the largest Planned Parenthood in North America, which is in Houston, Texas, because we were going down there to pray as part of 40 Days for Life, right? So I had met him there. I was working with the youth, and he had come to quite a bit of the youth events. And our family always sat in the front row at Mass. And so that's all he said he knew. He said we were coming to Mass. He knew I cared enough to get on a bus to go to Planned Parenthood and pray, and I was working with the youth. And he thought, this is somebody who cares about her faith. And that's really all you need. You don't have to know everything about vocations to do something about it. Because I actually think there are a lot of people who care, and they know that without priests we don't have Eucharist, and without Eucharist we don't have the church. They know that. They see their priests hurting. They had no idea there's anything they can do about it.
Yeah, the Catechism speaks of how the sacraments make the church. You know, that they form the church, like they're forming Christ's body, and the priesthood is serving that. You know, you need that's necessary for the offering of the Mass. So it's a beautiful connection. That John Paul II on his document on the Eucharist, he talked about how the church draws her life from the Eucharist.
And how do we have the Eucharist?
Right.
So when I was asked to do this, and then there were no resources for us to do this, I actually just worked with our parish priest, and he trained me, because being a convert, not knowing what that vocations meant and what that, he had to train me quite a bit, and to share with me some of the big lessons I learned was that everything we needed to do at our parish needed to be rooted in prayer for vocations. So even when we would have Priesthood Sunday, so that's the last Sunday of September, is Priesthood Sunday. And even though that's a time of affirmation for a priest, there should be some aspect of prayer. So we need prayerful action versus only, a lot of people have been praying for vocations for decades. We need to pray, and we need to have action along with that prayer. So that's how I feel like for example, one of the first things we did as a vocation ministry, lowercase vocation ministry at our parish, was to consecrate our ministry to Jesus through our Blessed Mother. And Father Victor wrote a consecration prayer for us. Like everything that we were going to do was going to be so rooted and foundationally sound in prayer. And everything else was going to come from that. Like that makes sense right now that I say that. But did I know that that's what it should be? No, but Father Victor did. And so we did that. And then we started doing all kinds of activities at our parish, like bringing seminarians in to talk to the kids, and playing Pin the Mitre on the Bishop at the Parish Festival, and all kinds of fun things to bring awareness to it, and then affirmed our priests, affirmed those who said yes. Our ministry was focused on priesthood, religious life, and sacramental marriages, because if we don't have marriages striving for holiness, we won't have priests and sisters. So we need to do all three. So we started doing that. We for about 18 months, we were just going and doing, and I didn't really think anything more of it, that I just felt like we were first of all, I was having a blast. I loved it. I love being around sisters and priests and seminarians and people who care about the church. I feel like people who are in vocation world are the salt of the earth. They want to build up the church in that way, right? And so we were just going and doing, And then what we realized is things were happening at our parish. I would have 2 girls come up to me after a youth event and say, "Hey, Mrs. G," that's how I was known, and I was the vocation lady even back then. So, Mrs. G, do you remember when you had those sisters come to our classroom a few years ago? Yeah, I just wanted you to know that we are both discerning religious life. And of course, they're whispering, right? We're both discerning religious life. Like things were happening we totally unexpected.
Yeah.
People were coming to our family holy hours for vocation,
Right.
Meeting the sisters who were there. Anyway, it was just fantastic. So then the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston kind of saw the success of what was going on and said, "Rhonda, how can we do that all over Houston?" And I said, "Well, maybe I could write a pamphlet." And that pamphlet turned into the first book that I wrote, 100-fold, A Guide to Parish Vocation Ministry. So it was everything I was wishing I would have found in 2011. Why are we doing this? One of the reasons why we're doing this is because we have 3,500 parishes in the United States without a resident priest.
Wow.
The average age of a priest is 67 years of age.
Wow.
38 parishes last year in 2021 did not ordain a new priest. In the North and Northeast in particular, and they've known this for decades, that in 2025, a very large number of priests will be of retirement age. But guess what's not happening? They're not retiring. But they are getting a letter. Now, not every diocese is doing this, but some, because I've heard from their priests, that priest is getting a letter from their bishop and saying, "I know, Father John, you're supposed to be retiring. If you do retire," which I respect that if you want to retire, but the parish will have to close if you do. And then the step from that is, for example, in Newark, the pastors are receiving a letter saying, "I know that you had a parochial vicar, an assistant pastor, right? But he's going to have to go on and be a pastor somewhere, and we're not going to be able to replace him." Right. That's the step before the other one. Anyway, this is happening, and it's real. That is not the only reason we do this. I mean, marriage is hurting. The number of sisters is what it was 100 years ago. We've got a lot of work to do. But it's very fundamental to me because we need our priests. Our priests are the visible witness to Christ to all of us. And so if we just have one more yes, and we know from our work we've had a lot more yeses, but if we just have one, I'm like, that's worth every bit of this. Right. So the first book came out, and the website vocationministry.com. So if somebody liked one of the activities in the book, then they'd go to the website, download whatever they needed to do it, put their parish name on it, and go. That's from my education background. I wanted to make this so easy for people, right, that they didn't have any other word but, yes, I'll do this. Anyway, so then I thought I was done. I was like, "Jesus, I did what you asked. I'm done, right? I'm good." And I go to a vocation directors conference. So each year, the vocation directors from around the country get together. There's one for each diocese, and share ideas and have workshops and all that. And I was there just to share with them about 100-fold. And so many of them came up to me and said, "I've read this book. Thank you. Can you come train our priests? Can you come teach our parishioners how to do this?" And I looked at them like they were crazy. And I'm like, "Have you read the first part of the book? I'm a convert. There got to be rules against that. They're not going to let me talk to priests, right? About promoting vocations? No way." And they assured me that it was fine. So I keep saying yes. Whatever God puts in front of me, I try to do.
So have you traveled all over?
50 different dioceses across North America, all over, from coast to coast in Canada and
giving
all
talks
over.
to priests?
So I've given 30 priest convocations. So that means I'll be the main speaker training priests for 1, 2, 3 days. Wow. Sometimes 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 talks. And then that follows up. So then we ask the priest to send 2 to 5 parishioners to a parishioner workshop, a diocesan-wide parishioner workshop, so I can train. So 50, 60% of parishes represented at this workshop and train them how to do this. That's how we get real movement. And we have seen what happens now that we've been tracking the numbers. For example, Ogdensburg, New York went from 3 to 18 seminarians in 3 years. Peoria, Illinois went from 9 to 21. Stockton, California went from 0 to 9. That's just a few of the examples of the transformation that can happen to become more vocation minded. Intentionality is what's needed.
Yeah. And what, as a priest, I'm listening to this, what would be like the thing you see maybe a lot of priests could improve on, that maybe the most common thing they're not doing?
Okay, the most common thing they're not doing is they're not talking about vocations.
Like
it's
from the
shocking.
pulpit?
It's shocking. Yeah, they don't talk about it at all, you know. And I'm not even just talking about the word vocations. I'm talking about because it doesn't have to be all that all the time. That's That is not. I need it to be organic. I need the priest to talk about when there's a Holy Spirit moment in the gospel, about listening to the Holy Spirit, about parents listening to the Holy Spirit and supporting their children's call, whatever that is, right? Or just doing God's will, right? And it can't just be when Eli and Samuel are going back and forth. I'm listening.
Although I do know a deacon that answered the call when he heard that.
Well, no, that's a good thing, but it can't only be then, right? Okay, so that's one thing. Talk about it. Secondly, share their story. Share their story. So many priests say, "Oh, Rhonda, I shared my story when I got to my parish. So that was probably 10 years ago." Yes. Yes. You got to share it more often. You can't think that everybody's heard it and take bits and pieces and work it into your homily. Share about your parents. Share about your struggles. Share about how you were just a kid like these kids that are in the pews are, right? You love soccer. You were in the band. You had a girlfriend. Share your normal life and what it was like to discern. Because I've also had priests say, "Oh, but Rhonda, I don't have a great discernment story," or that, the Blessed Virgin Mary didn't come down and talk to me. And I'm like, is that our bar? Is that the bar we're sharing with the kids out in the pews, that the Blessed Virgin Mary has to come and talk to them before they can say yes to their call? It has to be sharing the reality that it was probably, because I've heard this over and over again, a restlessness. It was found in prayer that you heard a whisper, right? It was a gentle nudging, or it came from a priest saying, "Have you ever thought about this?" It wasn't this big, massive story. Okay, so they needed to tell it.
You point out too, a large percentage is through adoration.
Exactly.
That's part of the call story. Oftentimes, what percentage?
It's between 80 to 90% of newly ordained say they either heard the call in adoration or it was nurtured in adoration. Which is why adoration is so key in a parish or school, to have some time of adoration.
Can I tell you a couple elements of my story?
Please. Would love it.
I was born and raised Catholic, and I stayed with Sunday Mass. I was in CCD, and through college, I remember missing a few Masses, but for the most part, going to Mass. And I had this conversion experience at the end of college, and so then I'm working, and I'm going to daily Mass, and I'm going to adoration, and I had no attraction to the priesthood. Never, ever wanted to be a priest. Never drew me or anything. And I don't remember the order of this exactly, but I was in adoration. Because adoration, I heard Fulton Sheen talk about the Holy Hour, started making the Holy Hour, and I remember praying in there. And actually, now that I'm even telling I think this is good why to tell the story too, because different things strike me when I tell the story. And I'm just remembering now too, I had a friend of mine, a high school buddy, and we were both working up in Huntsville, Alabama, and we would have lunch and stuff together. And I'm, he was seeing this big conversion to me, and he didn't really have a faith, and he said, "Why don't you become a priest?" And I just quickly said, "Well, I'm not called to that." He said, "No." He was he was trying to guilt me or something, but he was saying, "You should just automatically want to do this if you really believe what you've been telling me at lunch all these times, And I remember him telling me that, and I just kind of said, "Well, you got to have a call." And then I remember one time praying in adoration, and I felt like this kind of interior thing. why don't you become a priest, or would you become a priest? And I remember just saying no, and then at some point in there, my pastor, at the time we had like this 6:15 a.m. mass, and I would bounce around to other masses in town, but it was, and he asked me, I remember it was an empty church in the corner, and he was this soft-spoken, mild-mannered Irish priest, and he said, did you ever think about becoming a priest? And I said, not a chance. I remember I said it kind of strongly, not a chance. And then I was working for this small defense contracting company, and the contract was running up, so they said, well, we're going to have to let you go. And that night, when I was going to a Monday night mass at Our Lady of the Visitation Church in Huntsville, and a friend of mine put a vocation magazine that had all these religious orders and maybe articles about discernment and stuff. And I flipped it open, and had a picture of St. Anthony Mary Claret. I said, why did they try to kill this man 19 times? I said, because he fearlessly preached the gospel. And none of that appealed to me. I had no, being a martyr didn't thrill me, didn't do anything for it. Preaching the gospel didn't do anything. But it just, something just said, it just drew me, and I went in to talk to I kind of look at it as like God had to say, he had to pull the rug from under me, lose the job, and kind of have a new openness. And I was reading all this chastisement, Marian apparition stuff, so I thought the world was basically ending pretty soon. So as I put it, I thought I was going to get married and go deliver pizzas and wait for the big rocks to fall from heaven. But I went in, I remember my confessor was this 80-year-old Salvatorian priest, and I said, I told him the thing would happen, and he said there's the Claretians, and so he pulled out this big, the big church directory, the big fat one, and so he looked up the numbers of the Claretians and stuff, and I think it was something like, it was 3,000 to 5,000 members. And I thought, I told him, I said, well, that's small. And I remember he looked up at me, he said, no, that's big. And we're sitting kind of in this ratty office. It was a poor office. They had literally wallpaper peeling off the wall, an empty bookcase behind him. And I wanted this big, successful, powerful church organization, to be part of. And but anyway, I went and visited the Claretians, and I came. Someone brought me down here to EWTN and visited the community, and just felt like it fit. But I think about a lot of those themes are in there, which you talk about. The adoration was certainly of a Marian dimension, and then, I forgot about the guy saying that, but yeah, 2 people directly asked me.
On average, it's 6.
6?
On average, it's 6 times a young man has been asked, have you ever thought about this before they enter seminary?
Yeah.
I've met priests who are asked 15 times.
Really?
It took them forever. I'm like, okay, you're a slow learner there. But so that's not surprising that you went through that very similar story, right?
Yeah.
Of the no.
Right.
So one of the aspects of what I say is that I train parishioners how to ask.
Yeah.
I actually train priests because not very many priests are inviting young men to discern either anymore.
Right.
So I go role play with them and say, how do you ask this? Do not say you look good in black and white.
Yeah.
That is not a good strategy, right?
Right.
Okay, you got to find a characteristic of this young person, whether it's a man or woman, for being a sister or a priest, and say, Johnny, you're so prayerful when you're serving at the altar, or I see you're a real leader and people look to you.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about being a priest?
Yeah.
And get ready for the no.
Right.
Get ready for the no. Don't think that somebody's going to immediately go, oh, yes, I have, and I'm going to go enter tomorrow. Yeah, that's not going to happen most likely, right?
Right.
They're going to say no, and you keep the conversation really short and say something like, that's okay, Johnny. God has a big plan for you.
Yeah.
And he's got something special in mind. Go find out what it is. I'm going to be praying for you. End of conversation.
Right.
And just let it be. Let it sit with them. Because sometimes you just got to let it just gnaw at them a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And get into their heart.
Right. And I think too, I think for modern young men, like in regards to priesthood, probably sisterhood too, but it's like, and I identify, people will just nail the millennials and everything. And I'm kind of like holding my breath because thinking, I have those same traits, But I think part of it's like non-committal. You don't want to commit.
Yeah.
And that was like a thing for me, even though I was in religious life. And I told people, it's like, this is a sacrament of holy orders. You're receiving a spiritual mark to act in the person of Christ, the head of the body of Christ, to confect the Eucharist, to absolve sins. So you're spiritually marked. Whether you leave the priesthood, get thrown out of it, or quit, or whatever, you carry that mark into heaven, And it's like this, they call it an ontological change, a change in your being. And I just felt like that was such a commitment. Even like going to daily mass for years before I was ordained, I was like, are you technically you don't have to offer mass every day, but you're strongly, canon law says you should, but if you can. But there was something about just the commitment and the finality. And I think men tend to, and in general, our culture likes to keep all our options open, right? And you want to be able to grab the parachute,
Well, I would love to get the message out there that entering seminary isn't signing on the dotted line that in 8 years you're going to become a priest. Or same with the convent, because we need men and women to intentionally discern.
Right.
And how you do that best is in a place and with a schedule that allows that.
Right.
And so it would be really wrong of us to expect that every man that 100% of the men who enter become priests, because if they're discerning well, then you're going to have some that say, I can't by the end of it.
And, a huge factor for me too was like, even, join the community and then you go to seminary and I remember being at Steubenville doing some pre-theology, some philosophy work, and going to a local parish, and again seeing that kind of thing where it's like, this institution doesn't look like it's doing well right now. If you go to Silicon Valley, which I did a couple of years ago, and went like to the Google campus and everything. I mean, they have like space age designed buildings there with like these tarpaulin roof, design of it. And it's, Apple's got like this huge donut building that's $1 billion, and it's like, there's something in America, you want to be part of something that's successful. And the priesthood doesn't always ring as successful.
Well, I love the fact that you entered a Franciscan
community. On top of that.
There's God's sense of humor there, right, Father?
Right.
I mean, that you wanted success, and Francis was all about, the poverty, really, or living among the people, and
no
it's not about the material,
right?
So I love that how that worked in your life. Yeah.
But a big factor for me too was because being here, and Mother Angelica was doing a live show, and we would get like buses every week of pilgrims coming to see, and oftentimes there would be priests with this group coming. So we would have priests celebrating all the time. I was serving Mass, every day practically, probably, and certainly at the 7 a.m. Mass. So I met all these priests. And I remember one day it just clicked with me that, I enjoy priests. I like priests. I remember they have a great sense of humor. They really, to me, as a whole, it's like priests are the wittiest people I know. I mean, they could, and they're good with people. They generally have good people skills, and they're just kind of generally warm, inviting, you can talk to them, everything. And that reassured me. And I was thinking about that with Father Stu. I don't know if you saw that movie.
I did.
And his bigger story was, he was this tough guy boxer, and he didn't think he could be a priest because he wasn't like any of the priests. But he met Father Groeschel, who'd come out and kind of kick you in the shins and give this talk or whatever. And he said, I could be that kind of priest.
And he was, meaning, he really told it like it is. Like he didn't it wasn't flowery. It wasn't theologically like all up in the sky, right? It was very practical on how to fall in love with Jesus Christ. and
Yeah.
follow him.
Yeah.
And follow him.
So that might be a
yeah.
good point in there too. I don't know if that's one of your 75 points, but I mean, if some guy is sitting there saying, I don't relate to this whole priest crowd. I remember pulling up to the seminary, Mount St. Mary's, and I'll never forget, we got out, this is the first time coming to the center of the house, they call it, and they had this big guy there, and he just had this great belly laugh. And I remember that was like my entrance to the seminary. And I remember that was so attractive to me, that this is a place of joy and happiness. And it really is. I mean, a seminary, you get a bunch of guys together with guy humor going. It's like an aggressive, everyday kind of stand-up routine.
But it's true, Father.
Yeah.
So that is, number 3 is
Yeah.
to share joy.
Yeah.
If we want priests to inspire others
Mm-hmm.
to their vocation, whether it's priests or being sisters, or
Yeah.
even for a married couple, to have a joyful priest or
Right.
anyone living out their vocation joyfully.
Mm-hmm.
I say that so vocation comes through Jesus Christ, right? That is an absolute, Jesus Christ, the one who's calling, right? But sometimes he works through other people.
Mm-hmm.
And a joyful priest, sister, or married couple can inspire other vocations
Right.
by their
Right.
witness.
Right.
So yes, sharing their joy is
Yeah.
big,
Yeah.
and then inviting. So
Yeah.
there's it's not rocket science by any
Yeah.
means,
Yeah.
and people have been doing vocation work in parishes here and there over the course of the millennia, but I just happened to come along and kind of organize it all. That's how I look. I was just an organizer and
Mm-hmm.
putting all the activities together. And then through these workshops, giving these workshops to priests and parishioners, then I was asked, what do you have for teachers? What do you have for educators? And I didn't have anything until we couldn't go anywhere in 2020.
Mm.
So I had a COVID baby that I don't have to burp or feed, called The Harvest, A Guide to Vocation Ministry and Education, my second book. Took about 9 months to write. And so it came out in August of 2021 with its companion website, still at vocationministry.com, but there's all these tools for educators now. Because these same principles, of intentionality, if a parish is intentional about promoting vocations will come. And same with the school. If the school has that as a priority
Mm-hmm.
to promote vocations, that meaning that each child is called to be a saint.
Mm-hmm.
And what most people don't realize is how, if they marry Jesus, they marry the church, or they marry another person,
Right.
that's their pathway to sainthood. That's their sanctification in this life.
Right.
And we want everyone to be a saint. We want our kids to be saints. So we should want to help them find this. So then we started giving workshops to principals and teachers and catechists. And so that's been a whole new avenue of things. And why should we do that? Well, 40% of the newly ordained year after year say they first heard the call between 6 and 13 years of age. 6 and 13 is the biggest chunk. The rest are kind of scattered. And so what's happening in a young Catholic's life between 6 and 13? They're going to catechism classes, or they're in the Catholic school, or they're altar serving, they're in youth ministry, they're singing in the choir, their parents are taking them to Mass, they're active in their faith life. Mm-hmm. That's when they're being called, but it's not being fostered at that point in time. Mm-hmm. That's the problem. So we've got a lot of lost vocations walking around. A kid hears it at 7, they never hear anybody else talking about it.
Yeah.
And so they think they're abnormal. They don't know anything else, so they say no, and they don't do anything about it. And then most of the time that call is lost, because then they meet Joanne, in high school, and then they end up getting married.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want, wherever they hear the call, whenever they hear the call, by people they trust, that's how it should be fostered.
Right. And I think, we're talking a lot about like priests kind of talking about it and trying to inspire it. And I think you also talk about you're trying to help people discern marriage. And sometimes it can be hard, like if you're struggling yourself, and maybe not in a real serious way, but it's like you don't feel excited. I mean, even sometimes I think you can feel, I'm working hard at this, I enjoy it and everything, but it is tough right now. And I don't know if I can be convincing, inviting people. And I imagine that's true for marriage. There's a low point in the marriage. Like, what do you tell people about that?
Well, I say that but especially when I'm talking to priests, I say, look, you may not be feeling 24/7 joy.
Yeah.
First of all, I want you to share authentic joy. I don't want
Right.
you making this up.
Right.
I want you to love your priesthood.
Right.
I want you to remember how God called you
Yeah.
to this. And I want you to be the best priest that Jesus Christ is calling you to be,
Right.
and share that with people, because they're going to be, you're being authentic will make more of a difference than any fake sense of joy you can give. So giving reality is fine. Yeah. But I also say, if you're not feeling joyful and feeling that authentic joy, because that happens, then find the priest next door to come in and talk to your youth. Ask, don't be afraid to find those who are really feeling it at that time to come in and inspire your people. Because not only do youth need inspiration, adults need to see happy vocations. They need to see priests, sisters, married couples who love their vocation. They need to be inspired by that too, so that they can say, I would love for my son to say yes. If you have a priest who's really unhappy, okay, look, if you have a priest who's seemingly unhappy in their vocation, they need your prayers and they need affirmation. They need both of those things. So do that. And just know that there's a season for all of that, and just recognizing that married couples aren't 24/7 joyful either about that.
Right.
But there are others. We shouldn't hesitate to say, okay, this is what's happened. Sex scandal, let's put that out there. Sex scandal put a lot of priests in a corner. They retreated into a place of, I can't talk about that. I can't even talk to a young man now. I mean, I've got to be surrounded by 10 different people. And then how do you ask when you're surrounded by all these people? Have you ever thought about being a priest? So it's real, and that has happened. But listen, God is still calling. We know that. We know he's still calling. And you know what the devil wants more than anything? For us not to ask. He wants us to retreat, and he wants us in a corner, and he doesn't want us talking about it. Because he doesn't want any holy priests. He doesn't want holy sisters. He don't want holy marriages. So if he can get one priest to be quiet, he's winning. And I want to challenge our priests to come out of that place of retreat and go forward with confidence that God is still calling, and knowing that we need them to talk about it and to inspire others.
And I think sometimes I think it was Pope Benedict that said this, that the call is the cure. Like talking about Matthew, he's sitting at the tax collector booth and he's, come follow me.
Yeah.
So he is, he's got probably piles of money around him. He's probably, doing things that aren't so great. And yet he comes to follow him in all that weakness, all that habitual sin, all that stuff hanging on him. And following Christ is the answer. That's what's going to make us holy, and that's what is going to purify us and detach us. And I think even like if a priest is quote unquote struggling, or I don't know if that's the right word sometimes, but I think still going out and doing what you need to do, to promote vocations, there's something about that just fidelity to it that's powerful that the priest might not see. He's not Mr. Young. And they say, when a priest is young, he looks like a saint, but he's not. He hits middle age, he doesn't look like a saint, he's not. But when he's older, he doesn't look like a saint, but he is, right?
I've never heard that. That is so cool. I love that. Yes.
We can judge it in a superficial way. And the older I get, I look at some of the priests that, have been in a parish by themselves, running things, keeping it going, no scandals, nothing flashy, not the great preacher, but just that fidelity is really awe-inspiring, and sometimes people see that. I don't know if a young person would see that as easily. They just see the peeling wallpaper. But I did see, I know in that priest, my 80-year-old confessor, I would see him praying the rosary, and he moved really slow, and he wasn't real peppy, and he wasn't real clever, but I saw fidelity in him as a 23-year-old guy. I could recognize that. And so showing up and giving that call, that message is powerful. Just another seminary story for me. I remember, we were there. Well, this is maybe my second year. And it was like we were just coming back from summer break. And we had like the very affable priest. He wasn't real academic or scholarly, but he had great people skills. So I'm talking to him. He's real friendly. And they got this new priest who's had to be in his 60s and really gruff. He coached football in high school. And the affable priest is like introducing me to this guy and this priest. And I remember the priest looked at me, and it's like, I just got the feeling he couldn't care less that I was a seminarian. He was going to be a professor, right? And he was completely unaffable and he seemed like completely unimpressed, unenthusiastic or whatever. But that priest went on to inspire me in a huge way, not because his personality changed or anything, but he was such a great teacher. And he was actually, I just looked at him as a very masculine guy. He had this great strength. And when he preached, again, it wasn't dramatic, but the guy preached with power and authority because he knew his theology and he was bright. And he's saying, this is the way it is. And it wasn't like a tough message, but it was just like, clearly, this is the truth. And that appealed to me, of hanging on the truth. So sometimes it's like we just never know how the witness of different priests and different, like what a young man's looking for that might appeal to them.
Well, and doesn't it show us that God calls all kinds of people, right? I mean, look at his own disciples.
Right.
And who he called, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people go through the I'm not worthy.
Yeah.
I'm not worthy.
Right.
And we've got to get, right? Isn't a religious life and priesthood and marriage is calling you out of self? Right? It's not about you worthy, right? God, equips the called, right? I mean, that's what we hear. So if that's the case, then it can't be just about us. And we need all kinds of people. Just like you're saying, we need all kinds of priests. We need all kinds of sisters with different charisms. We need all kinds of married couples, right? Such the variety. And we need that. I mean, I think of Mother Teresa when you were talking about just faithful.
Right.
Like the fidelity.
Yeah.
And the fact that she had so many years of desolation, right? That she didn't have conversations with God like she wanted, but she was just faithful. Right. And she did the next right thing.
Right.
Put the next foot in front of the other and just kept going.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we need to show our young people. They need those examples, right? Aren't there so many saints like that?
Right.
Those saintly examples of just doing the next right thing and for the right reason.
I think God has oftentimes, not always, I guess, but it just seems like maybe through superiors around you, they have a way of placing you like where your skills are utilized. I can remember one of my classmates, he was older guy in seminary, and he was like extremely low key and came across as like super low energy, And, I mean, he was only like in his 50s, I think, probably at the time. But, he went on to be this great reconciler with the scandals. He could, because of his easy way about him, he could bring groups of people together. Or you see maybe some guys, I just see it so much now, nobody's got all the gifts.
Right.
And so you get a guy that's good with canon law, he can do this work, and he can cross the T's and dot the I's and love every minute of it, And then you got the youth guy or whatever. So,
and we need all of that.
Yeah.
And we need all of that. But, I feel like that witness, no matter what, we still need the witness out there.
Yeah.
We still need our priests to put themselves out there and be that witness to Jesus Christ in such a way that it inspires others. You know, it's so funny. One of my good friends, she's on our advisory board, Sister Joseph Andrew Bogdanowicz. She's one of the foundresses of the Dominican Sisters of Mary, Mother of the Eucharist, right?
Yeah.
And she says, if you want more priests, put more sisters in the classroom. Like, you know, because and that's to my point, that a joyful witness to any vocation inspires others.
Right.
To any of the other vocations.
Right.
We just need somebody who's living that life with such love of life and love of their vocation that God's called them, so that others can go, gosh, what do you have?
Right.
I want that.
Right.
And to sacrifice to seek it out.
Yeah.
Another thing is service. Mm-hmm. Service is a huge part of saying yes. Getting out of yourself, right? So many people find their call in mission trips and serving the poor, and that's something that is desperately needed in a culture that we live in right now, that is so self-centered that we can't imagine. What? Oh, I'd have to go without my latte today? What? I can't imagine that. You know, I can't imagine that being sacrifice.
I remember we interviewed a sister one time, and I forgot what community she was with, but she was like, I think she was like Mrs. Popular in high school, and you could tell she's just very good personally, and you could see how she'd be popular, attractive, and stuff. And she did one of these mission trips to Haiti or something, and it was a really impoverished area, and they had they practiced like this great hospitality, and a few of them were invited to this home, and they had nothing, but they set up the best, whatever food they had, they set it out. And it just, we talked earlier about wrecking life, it just wrecked her life. She said she just went back to where she was staying, and she just, like, for a day, she just cried in the room. And I guess it was breaking her out of our secular kind of false security and all this kind of stuff. And just awaken her to, like, spiritual values, and she heard the call to be, it sort of began there in her life. So that's I never thought of that, just practically doing service trips.
And so not only that, but even just, and we don't have to go on this grand mission trip, like, flights away.
Right.
We need youth groups, schools to take up service in such a way that it becomes a part of the children's lives. And of course, we want to encourage parents to do that too. But that just to serve at the soup kitchen or wherever downtown, and make it a regular part of life, serving others. Yeah. So I feel like I know we've only scratched the surface, because vocations is like such a big topic, but I want people to know there's something that can be done. They see their parish hurting because their priest is overwhelmed, or they're sharing their priest with 3 other parishes, because that happens. There's something to be done about it. And I just really hope that they go to vocationministry.com, get the guidebook, find out what they can do, and get started. I hope more priests will talk about vocations and share their story and share their joy and just live it out.
Yeah, you were talking about, is it Sister Joseph Andrew?
Yes.
Yeah, and she's originally a Nashville Dominican.
Yes, so she's the foundresses in the Ann Arbor Sisters, and she's been their vocation directors for 25 years.
Well, I remember, you just reminding me of this, and I've told her this in person. They've come here every now and then, but I remember sitting in seminary, and so this is like 98, 99, and we had the shortwave radio. We used to listen to EWTN. And I was listening to Life on the Rock. Jeff Cavins was doing it, and he was interviewing Sister Joseph Andrew. And I was like struggling. I was like thinking, how do I really know this is for me, And Jeff asked her that question. He said, like, how do you know, sister? And I just remember she had that great kind of Tennessee Southern drawl. And she just said, oh, I just think you know, Jeff. I just think you know. And that's what I needed to hear, because I knew deep down. I mean, I was like looking at all this stuff and just, conjuring up all this fear in my mind and it's like, but deep down I knew, that this is kind of what fit, and this is what God was calling me to do. And
we make it more complicated than it needs to be.
yeah,
I mean, really, I mean, if you think you're just talking about Matthew,
yeah,
come follow me.
right,
It could be that simple.
yeah,
It's just he trusted. I'm like, for some reason, he just followed.
right,
And nowadays we just have so much more in front of us. So that up the 80s and 90s, 1980s, 1990s, the average age of a priest being ordained was in the upper 20s.
yeah,
And now it's upper 30s. We got to 40 even.
wow,
So which is causing some issues here and there. Just for what you were saying, you know,
right.
there's a delay factor.
Yeah,
Of the worry, you know, and I wish people would just get out of the boat.
right,
Get out of the boat.
right,
If you hear it and you're 18, get out of the boat.
right,
Go try.
yeah,
Go discern well. Go find out if that's what God's calling you to. The seminary is never wasted on anybody. Convent life is never wasted on anybody.
yeah, it is. It's a great formation, you know, to teach you how to pray and some human formation. And yeah, that's what I most often tell somebody, just, yeah, go try it. I'm usually a more passive guy, you know. You're not, I can tell. But
That's not my nature, no.
On this issue, I do tell guys that, well, go try it out. If you feel like called religion, go visit them. Visit several communities, because to me it was a big factor. I just felt like I fit, you know, when I came here. You know, if someone's trying to get married, you gotta. I heard a Protestant pastor say this one time, you know, if you just sit at home, and unless you're going to marry the mailman or the UPS guy, you got to get out there.
You got to put yourself out there, right?
Right.
Oh my gosh, that is so good. You know, something that's really helping discerners is, so when we couldn't travel in 2020 as well, we have a large discernment group at our Facebook page. One for women called The Veil and one for men called The Collar. And what we were hearing from all these discerners was a lamentation of, I can't visit the convent. I was supposed to go to a come and see. I was supposed to enter the convent, but I can't, right? Because of the COVID shutdown, right? And so we got a program together, a virtual come and see, if you will. So we did 5 communities back to back, live over Zoom. Each community had an hour to show us behind the scenes life in their convent.
Right.
And pray with us and interview sisters and show us their adoration chapel and tell us about their lives. And so all of these videos can be found at our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Vocation Ministry's YouTube channel. It's called Behind the Veil. We've done 15 different communities for women. Behind the Collars is a behind-the-scenes look into diocesan priesthood. And then Behind the Habit is looking into religious life for men. So it's a perfect opportunity, because a lot of discerners are looking online first, right? That's their first line of like, is this something I would want to do? And it gives them an opportunity to say, is this the charism? Is this my charism? Right. Is this something that works for me? Would I want to be a Franciscan, or am I more of a Dominican? All of these different things can get answered by listening and watching and being experienced, and then they can go and visit the community. So it's kind of like a first step to narrow things down for them. So I hope that that's helpful, because we've heard from discerners that they are entering religious life with a community because they found our videos.
Right. And that's Jesus' invitation, right? Come and see.
Come and see.
Yes.
So I invite all discerners to go find it. Go look up the videos and start somewhere. Don't just sit there going, oh, I don't know. Do something active. Be active and pray. Be active and pray, and let Jesus guide you in the call, whatever it may be. Because that is what's going to lead us to our ultimate happiness. That's what he wants. He wants our ultimate happiness. I'm not talking about passing happiness. You know, that passing happiness thing, that's not what we should be seeking. We should be seeking that ultimate happiness and joy that he wants for us in our lives. And that doesn't mean that we're always joyful. That doesn't mean that we don't struggle. You know, the sacrifice is, we have to journey with God through the sacrifice too. So don't think that just because you've said yes, I mean, you look at your saintly examples here, just because you've said yes to being a priest doesn't mean you are now forever joyful.
Right.
Or that you never struggle. So that's ridiculous because we all struggle. This is what this world is all about. We hope that we just struggle with Christ and we find that ultimate happiness as a saint at the other end.
Yeah. And what, do you know where that is in the scripture? And the come and see? Let's see.
No, I
got it right
no.
here.
Okay, you got it. Good.
Well, they're telling me it's 1 John, but that's in the gospel. Come and see. Yeah, John 1:39. And I'm just going to read this here.
Yeah, please do.
John. Okay. He said, the two disciples, okay. The next day again, John was standing with two of his disciples, John the Baptist, and he looked at Jesus as he walked and said, "Behold, the Lamb of God." The two disciples heard him say this, and they followed Jesus. Jesus turned and saw them following and said to them, "What do you seek?" And they said to him, "Rabbi, where are you staying?" He said to them, "Come and see." They came and saw where he was staying, and they stayed with him that day, for it was about the 10th hour. Come and see. So there's this call to come and be with Jesus, spend time, and as you say, get out of the boat. And
it's a leap of faith.
Yeah.
It is a leap of faith, and I don't want to minimize it in any form or fashion. I don't, because it is a big deal, no matter what. But we do need to still take that leap of faith and say, "Yes, Lord, if this is what you're calling me to, I will keep putting that one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other, until you say this isn't it anymore."
Right.
Because isn't that Mother Angelica, right? Isn't that her? Like,
Yeah.
that is so her.
Right.
Like, whatever you put in front of me, Lord, I will do to the best of my ability, and you will put a blockade in front of me if it should not be.
Right.
And so if we have that trust in that divine providence that he is going to provide us with everything we need to say yes to whatever God's putting in front of us, then it takes the onus off of us. Like, all we have to do is say yes and just go and do.
Right. And that call is like repeated in it. It's like he's always calling us to come deeper, and I recently, like maybe it was a year ago or something, I grew up on these 25 acres outside of Huntsville, and my mom had developed it and stuff, and then and eventually she was selling it. She couldn't keep it up, and this part in the woods where we lived in, I was just going up there and take one last look at it. It's becoming a housing development now, but it's like, I remember the area, we had this trailer, and they had like these big holes in the ground that were, I could tell they were like a nest. I'm talking like a soccer ball could fit in there. And I thought, I forgot what I thought, but I remember I came back and I said, what would live in something like that? And this guy just threw out there, it's probably a fox or something, And then also when I was walking, they had like this rattlesnake on the trail. And I was like, and he wasn't rattling. I was like 10 feet away from him and I saw him. I just thought, okay, I'm done here. But later I thought, the foxes have lairs, and, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. I felt like God was telling me, don't look back. You've left this. You're doing this. You're following me. Embrace that. And it hit me later, the power of that. But I think it is a continuing call, that we have. And I tried to say it on the show. I heard that from Bishop Barron. He preached on it so well. Somebody told me he got it maybe from Flannery O'Connor, but this invasion of grace. That I heard this talk he gave. He was talking about the virtues, the cardinal virtues, and the Greeks made these delineations. Thomas Aquinas took them up and used them to describe all these moral virtues. You live this, you're going to live a good life. and do this in life. You'll have a good life. And that's great advice, just to seek virtue. But Barron made the point. He said, but Christians, we also live by faith, hope, and love. So we're going beyond this, and we're going to follow Christ. We're going to follow Jesus, and we're going to be taken hold of by something greater than ourselves. Not just living a good life, which is good.
Yeah, right.
But to be possessed by God himself, that he will invade our life with his grace and call us to follow him and do Lord knows what in life. And it's true for married people too. You don't have no guarantees of where you're going, what you're going to walk through, and what God's going to call you to. And he talked about the boats, where he got into Peter's boat, to preach to the crowds along the shoreline. Then he tells them to cast the nets again, and they bring in this fish, and they need to call other boats to help them out. You get this, you feel like the boat is swamping. The passage might actually say that. And I thought that is so true. It's like we have our plans and want to go a certain way, and we want stability and security maybe to some degree, the way we want it, our comfort, whatever. And God's just going to wreck that. He's just going to get in your boat and he's going to swamp it, right? And he's going to draw this fruitfulness out of your life that you can't imagine. Today we had Edith Stein in her feast day, and it's like, this great philosopher, this great teacher. She was giving talks and stuff and speaking on women's issues and high-level philosophy talks, all this kind of stuff. Joins the Carmel and is still writing in the Carmel and stuff. But she said, she came to a point, she realized our only salvation now is in the cross. God's calling us to suffer she's telling her sister, to suffer for our people, the Jewish people, and to offer up that Holocaust. But it's like, this is a God that's so great that can demand everything, the ultimate sacrifice. And I think I tried to capture just a hint of that. I was preaching in the parish the other day, and to say, this isn't like an ordinary thing. This isn't a secular life. You answer the call to the priesthood. This is the greatest drama in life. Yes, there's tedium, there's routine, and there's difficulties and blah, 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 blah. But it's taken up into God's plan, and he's going to use it for his kingdom, and he'll take everything you got to give. Now, isn't that exciting?
And wouldn't everybody at the end of their life,
right,
wouldn't they want to look back and say, I gave it all to him
right,
to use however he wanted?
Right. Yeah, when you look back on your life, don't you want to be able to say you did something great with your life?
Yeah. And the only way it's going to happen, it's not us doing great, right? We're just putting one foot in front of the other, and God's going to use whatever we give to make it that, so that we can look back on it and go, that's amazing. God did that. Yeah. I didn't do that. God did that. Yeah. He worked through me. He worked through all these people to make this happen.
Right.
We want holy examples like that all around us.
Yeah.
I hope more people will promote vocations.
Yeah. And I'm going to give my last word, and I'm going to let you give your last word. And one point I wanted to make that was so important for me was, and I've told this story many times, my father, when I was in college, he got sick and died of cancer a year and a half in. And into college for me, and a couple years after that is when I had this conversion experience. It began there, but I always kind of knew it was or maybe later I learned the theology of it. I knew the theology of suffering and meriting that grace, that I was put on a different path, and different mindset and thinking and all that. But, a few years later, I'm joining the Franciscans, and I'm in seminary, and I was struggling in seminary about discerning the priesthood. And I was visiting my grandparents in New Orleans, and we'd go down there and eat crabs and crawfish and drink beer, right? Moderately drink beer. But I'm sitting at the table, just my grandfather and I were at this moment kind of alone at his house, and I remember he had like a Dixie beer in his hand. And we didn't have like deep conversations so much, you know. But I remember he said, how's it going? How's it going? You know, he just said that one phrase. And I remember saying, oh, I don't know how, you know. And he kind of said, oh, don't start that static. He said, it's a good life. You know, the priesthood's a good life. And he was raised deeply in the Catholic Church and stuff. And I just needed to hear that. My own father wasn't there to say that. And as a young man, I needed to hear that from him, that this, and even though intellectually you can know it, you can know the theology, of course it's a good life. You know, it's a sacrament, it's a holy orders. And you can have a million reasons. But I think there's something, for a lot of guys, you need to hear it from a father figure, you know, that this is good. So I just say that out loud because I think it's important for mentors or fathers or uncles or whatever, some kind of father figure in the young man's life to say, this is good. This isn't weak. You know, this isn't running away from things. This is good. And I think that should be a point in your book too. I don't know if it's
well, I tell priests all the time, think of the priest who inspired you.
Yeah.
Be that priest for somebody else.
Right.
Because almost every priest say they were inspired sometime during their discernment by a priest.
That's well said. Yeah.
And so if they're going to, if we need a new generation of holy priests,
right,
then please ask the priests to step out of their own boat and have all of their reservations to inspire in a variety of different ways.
Yeah.
And that next generation.
Because I think some of us lose confidence. Well, I'm not that good of an example. I've got so much weakness and stuff raging in my life. I don't feel like I can, but you can. It's something deeper than the words you say or something. There's something deeper. I think it's part of like the masculine genius is to affirm other men or to call other men, or something happens in a mysterious way that, because I even think of family members I had, you know, I could see that they had their own stuff raging, but it's like I looked at them for masculine role models with all weakness and whatever. And it was, I consider it, they contributed to my formation, you know, in my life, you know. So, you know, guys need to do that, as you said, to do that to others. But
yes, and I'm so thankful to have had this opportunity. I would love everybody to, no matter what, everybody can pray for more men and women to generously say yes to God's call. Right. Okay, so we can all do that every day. Yeah. And I hope more will do that. Yeah. And just know that God will help and do what, if He's called you, that He will equip you. And I mean that for the lay person who possibly could be helpful in this role. Like I was. I mean, I didn't even know what the word vocation meant in 2011. Okay, right. So you do not have to have a theology degree to promote vocations at your parish or school. Right. So laity, we need you because it can't all be on our priests. Right. That we need our laity to take up the mantle and say, you know, I'm going to help build up this church. And so, I mean, look, I'm not an example of much for sure. You know, I never expected to be an expert on anything except raising my two children, and my two children would say otherwise. But I do believe that, you know, stepping out and doing something, saying I will do it, and find out how to do it and just go forth, because God needs all of us to play a role in this. Right. This isn't just for a priest or a vocation director to do. It can't be. Right. It can't. The job is way too big for that. So I need everybody to take a role, whether it's praying for or doing something for vocations on a regular basis. I think that's so important, because I remember John Paul II said that, you know, the whole church has a role to play. And you know what I like about your story is that it's almost like you bring like a very practical approach. Let's do this, do this, do this. And it's like you're hitting upon real theology and everything, but it kind of feels like it comes from like common sense experience. But I know you're well read. You've read a lot of stuff too. But, well, not. I mean, it's definitely. I say my books are not a work of theology. They are practical. They come
Right.
from my education experience, you know, of being a teacher, and but I also love the church. I
Yeah.
absolutely love the church. I want the church to be around for many, many generations, and I love our priests and sisters and married couples. So we this is something that is essential. It's fundamental. It
Right.
cannot be seen as extra.
Yeah.
It's got to be
True.
fundamental to what we're doing at our parishes and schools.
Right.
If
Right.
we're going to have priests, new priests, if we're going to have new sisters and new married couples married in the church,
Yeah.
then we've got to get busy.
Yeah. And we haven't quoted it, but I feel like we have to say this, right? Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Pray therefore the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. So prayer is like linked to this,
It
as
has
you've
to
been
be.
saying.
It has to be.
And I'll just give one final word. Is I hear this all the time. Literally every day that I see a visitor here, I'll hear it sometime during the day. He said, basically some form of, we're praying for you. You know, so there's that praying for the call, but there's also that praying to sustain the call. And after hearing it so much, I always say, I went to this married conference one time, and I gave like a couple talks, and these line of women, you know, like a little bit older women, usually are watching EWTN and stuff, and they just wanted to talk to me. Every single one of them asked me to pray for someone. And I talked to some guys, none of them asked me to pray for anyone. So I'm just saying this, my final word, I think, is, you know, women, you clearly have a gift of prayer. God has called you that, I think, in a special way, that contemplative spousal image of the church. And I think so much heavy lifting is done there in vocations and sustaining priests. So I just want to encourage all the women out there that are praying, and I mean, I've been helped so much by even my conversion experience at the parish. I mean, I was in rosary groups. They were all older women. Those were my friends in my 23, 24 years old. And they're the ones that kind of cultivated my, you know, they were handing me books, read this, about the Baltimore Catechism and having rosary groups. They were the only ones praying. You know, they were the only ones praying in a group in the church. But I think that it's such an important role, and I think God places it on women's hearts. It just seems to come more naturally to them. And so I just want to encourage them out there. So,
Amen.
okay. Well, thank you, Rhonda, for talking with us. It's been great.
Thank you.
You
It's
probably
been
need
a
to go home
pleasure.
and call your family.
It's been a real blessing.